in private, behind a closed door, where no one could witness the sting. But that night on the rooftop in Boston, with candlelight trembling across the harbor, Cynthia Monroe proved me wrong. "Mrs. Harper, would you mind sitting at the far end? We just don't want the guests to get the wrong impression." Her smile didn't soften the blow. It sharpened it. Conversations around us faltered. A few guests glanced up, then quickly looked away. Rachel's cheeks flushed pink. My son, my only child, kept his eyes on his plate, pretending he hadn't heard a thing. And there I stood, in a dress I had ironed 3 times to make sure it looked right, holding the small gift I'd brought for Rachel, feeling suddenly like an intruder at a celebration I had been invited to only out of obligation. In that moment, something cold settled inside me. Not anger. Recognition. That morning, I woke up with the kind of hope that makes a woman my age feel almost foolish, like I'd slipped back into the skin of the younger version of myself. The one who still believed good things could happen without being taken away. I padded into the kitchen, still in my robe, and brewed a small pot of coffee, letting the smell fill my little Boston apartment. The place isn't much: peeling cabinets, a window that sticks every winter, a sofa older than Rachel herself, but that morning, everything felt warm, bright, almost promising. I set a few carnations into the chip blue vase I've kept for years. A silly habit, maybe, but flowers always softened the rough edges of my days. I kept catching myself smiling for no reason, humming while I wiped down the counters, checking my reflection in the microwave door as if it mattered. Because tonight was supposed to be special. A real celebration. The moment Daniel's world and mine finally met without awkward pauses or careful explanations. I imagined it all so clearly, walking into that rooftop restaurant with its glittering harbor view, being introduced as Daniel's mom, not the afterthought, not the obligation, but the woman who raised him. I pictured Rachel taking my hands warmly, her parents asking about Daniel's childhood, laughing as I told the same stories he used to beg me not to share. The time he wore his Halloween costume for 3 months straight. The year he insisted he could do long division, using feelings. The night he cried because he thought the moon was following us home in the car. Those small, tender things mothers remember long after everyone else forgets. I wanted to be part of their new family, not just the background blur. I wanted to feel included, like my presence mattered, like I wasn't something Daniel needed to keep tucked away out of sight. I thought maybe I'd meet people who would see me as more than the woman with a modest apartment and an old car held together by prayer. Maybe they'd see the years I spent working double shifts, the nights I studied for certifications after he went to bed, the care I poured into building a life for us out of almost nothing. I ironed my navy dress twice, even though the fabric is fading at the seams. I pinned my hair the way Daniel always said made me look soft. I put on the pearl earrings his father gave me after Daniel was born. They aren't real pearls, but they make me feel like someone who belongs at a table with linen napkins and expensive water glasses. For a moment, as I stood by the window sipping my coffee, I let myself imagine what it would feel like, finally, if Daniel looked at me with pride in front of others. If Rachel slipped her arm around mine. If her parents welcomed me with genuine kindness, not polite tolerance. If Daniel didn't have to choose between the life he'd built and the mother who'd helped him build it. All day I floated from room to room, checking my purse, retouching my lipstick, practicing how I'd introduce myself. "I'm Linda, Daniel's mom. I'm so happy to meet you." Simple words, but they mattered. Because tonight, I believed, was the night I would stop feeling like the outsider at the edges of my own son's life. I even stopped by a small bakery on Charles Street and picked up a box of lavender macarons Rachel once mentioned loving. I tied a ribbon around the box myself, nervous and excited like a schoolgirl heading to her first dance. I wanted Rachel's family to see that I cared, not with money. I didn't have the kind of wallet that could impress anyone, but with heart. Welcome to Life Voices, where family drama turns into late-life justice. If you're watching, tell us your city in the comments, we always read them. As I dressed, I caught my reflection in the mirror. 62 years old, a few lines around my mouth, a softness in places I used to keep firm. But my eyes were bright. Hope does that, it lights you up from the inside. And I allowed myself to believe that maybe, finally, things were turning. That maybe I would walk into that dinner and feel something I hadn't felt in a long time, accepted. While I waited for the rideshare car, I sat on the sofa and clasped my hands to steady my nerves. My heart kept fluttering like I was waiting for a verdict on something I'd spent years hoping for. I didn't want to expect too much, but after so many holidays spent alone, so many messages left unread, so many gentle invitations declined because things are hectic right now, I wanted this night to be different. I didn't want luxury or flattery or anything grand. Just a seat at the table. Just a little space in my son's life that didn't feel borrowed or temporary. As the car pulled up, I took one last look around my tiny apartment, the place where I'd dreamed of this moment. My stomach fluttered again. Tonight, I told myself, would be a start. A new beginning, a merging of families. I stepped outside believing I was walking toward connection, toward belonging. But life has a way of turning hope into something sharp. And I had no idea how deeply that truth would cut. The trouble didn't start with Cynthia's first insult. It began 20 minutes earlier, the moment I stepped through the restaurant doors and saw the way the Monroe family looked at me, curious, hesitant, almost assessing, like they were trying to decide whether I fit the picture they'd already painted in their minds. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself nerves could twist anything into the wrong shape. But the truth settled quickly, a slow-crawling awareness I tried my best to ignore. We were barely seated when the real sting came. Daniel told us you're trying your best, Cynthia said, leaning forward with a smile that felt rehearsed. Her diamonds caught the candlelight, blinking like tiny, icy eyes. It must be difficult living on such a modest salary. Boston is terribly expensive for people in your situation. People in my situation. The words hovered in the air like smoke. I felt Daniel stiffen beside her, but he didn't lift his head. Didn't defend me, didn't correct her. He simply reached for his water glass as if thirst could excuse silence. Before I could answer, her husband chimed in, his tone the casual cruelty of someone used to being unchallenged. We just want to make sure Rachel marries into stability. A strong foundation, you understand. We wouldn't want Daniel burdened by obligations. Obligations. They meant me. My throat tightened so fast I had to steady my hand on the tablecloth. I stared at the plate in front of me, the untouched bread roll, the folded napkin, anything that wasn't their smug expressions. The restaurant buzzed with soft conversation and clinking glasses, completely unaware that someone's heart had just been dropped into a blender and set to puree. Mom, just go with it, Daniel whispered, barely audible, as if we were co-conspirators in my own humiliation. He didn't look at me. He just nudged his fork, pretending the moment wasn't happening. I swallowed hard, trying to form a polite smile, but it felt like peeling skin off my own face. Oh, don't misunderstand, Cynthia added, her voice syrupy sweet. We're not judging, truly. It's simply that Rachel has been raised to expect a certain standard. We want her future to reflect that. I managed to meet her eyes then. Her expression was soft, gentle even, the way people speak to stray animals, hoping they won't follow them home. The worst part wasn't their assumptions. It was knowing Daniel had told them so little about me, so little of the truth, that they felt comfortable discussing me like a problem to be solved, a risk factor in their daughter's financial future. I wanted to say something sharp, something that would make them sit up straighter and rethink their entire approach. But I hesitated. I still wanted this night to work. I still hoped it could turn around. And hope makes fools of us all. I took a slow breath and forced kindness into my tone. I appreciate your concern, I said. But Daniel has never been. Cynthia waved her hand, cutting me off mid-sentence. Oh, sweetheart, you don't need to explain. Truly, we understand how hard these things can be. Sweetheart, the kind of word that sounds soft but lands like a slap. Mom's fine, Daniel muttered, but even that sounded like an apology instead of a defense. And then, as if choreographed, both Monroes leaned back in their chairs and studied me, really studied me. My discount store dress, my worn handbag, my shoes polished to hide scuffs. To them, I wasn't a mother meeting her son's future in-laws. I was an inconvenience, a reminder that Daniel came from something simpler, smaller, something they didn't want spilling into their polished world. Their daughter, Rachel, kept twisting the napkin in her lap, avoiding my gaze entirely. I couldn't decide if she was embarrassed by them or embarrassed by me. The server came by to pour wine, and for a moment I thought I'd use the distraction to collect myself. But when he hesitated near Cynthia's glass, she gestured toward me without looking at him. "Not too much for her," she said lightly. "We don't want things getting emotional." The table laughed. I didn't. Something cold bloomed in my chest, spreading like frost across every soft place inside me. It wasn't anger yet. It was recognition, painful, reluctant recognition, that these people had already decided who I was. And my own son had let them. I kept my hands folded tightly in my lap, feeling each pulse of my heart like a bruise forming beneath the skin. I told myself to breathe, to stay calm, to swallow the hurt and give the evening a chance. But the truth was already settling between us like another guest at the table. They didn't see me, not really. They saw what they wanted to see. And for the first time that night, I felt something shift, quiet, subtle, but undeniable. A small, steady voice rising inside me, whispering that maybe this evening wasn't meant to unite our families. Maybe it was meant to reveal them. If the earlier comments were small cuts, the rest of the evening became a slow carving, subtle, precise, delivered with such practiced politeness that anyone watching would think the Monroes were the picture of civility. But cruelty doesn't always shout. Sometimes it folds its hands neatly in its lap and smiles. The waiter had just set down the appetizers when Cynthia leaned in with an expression of exaggerated concern. "Linda, darling, would you like me to explain the menu? Some of these dishes can be intimidating if you're not used to dining out." I blinked at her. "I can read the menu just fine." "Oh, of course," she said brightly, as if humoring a child who insisted she could tie her shoes. "It's just that the pronunciation can be tricky. The last time someone ordered the bouillabaisse, they called it bouillabaisse. Isn't that adorable?" Her eyes flicked toward me, waiting for a mistake I refused to give her. I set the menu down quietly. "I won't be ordering that." She smiled, victorious, as if she'd proven something. Across the table, Robert Monroe launched into a long story about their summer home in Napa, his voice deliberately loud. "It's nothing extravagant, really. Just a modest little retreat with a vineyard. You'd love it, Linda, the sunsets are breathtaking." His gaze lingered on my dress, my thrift store earrings. Though I suppose travel can be difficult when finances are tight. Daniel coughed, muttering, "Dad, please," but even that sounded half-hearted, like a reflex rather than a stand against anything. Meanwhile, Rachel kept wringing her napkin until the edges frayed. She didn't say much, just quiet, tight smiles that tried to apologize for her parents without actually confronting them. I wanted to take her hand and tell her she didn't need to be ashamed for me. But she never lifted her eyes long enough for our gazes to meet. The rest of dinner felt like balancing on a thin wire stretched across a canyon. Each step, each breath, was a test. Every comment felt like a probe, a gentle push to see if I'd fall. "Daniel mentioned you work part-time?" Cynthia asked, her voice dipped in sugar. "I work full-time," I corrected. "I've been with my company for years." "How responsible of them to keep you on," she cooed, as if I were a charity case instead of a professional woman. I took a sip of water to avoid saying something sharp. The truth wasn't ready, not yet. I hadn't come here to impress anyone. I'd come hoping to belong. But belonging doesn't survive under inspection lamps. While the waiter cleared plates, Robert asked, "Have you considered downsizing? Boston's not affordable for single-income households." He said it like he was giving financial advice to a stranger in a bus station. "Dad," Rachel finally whispered. "What?" "I'm trying to help." Help. That word again. It was beginning to taste like metal. Daniel kept shifting in his seat as if the table were getting smaller around him. He didn't stop them. He didn't counter their assumptions. He didn't even place a steadying hand on my arm the way he used to when he was little and sensed I was hurting. He just let their words stack on top of me like stones. And while they spoke, memories kept rising inside me, uninvited but strong enough to sting my eyes. I remembered sitting at the library night after night finishing my business certification so I could keep a roof over our heads. I remembered sewing Daniel's school play costumes by hand because we couldn't afford the rental fees. I remembered the double shifts, the overtime, the years of carrying our lives on my back without letting him feel the weight. Everything I had done, every sacrifice, had been to build him into the man he could become. Never spoiled, never entitled, never afraid of hard work. Yet here he was, letting others decide my worth. The deepest wound wasn't the Monroe's assumptions. It was Daniel's silence, the way he let their version of me stand unchallenged. The way he seemed strangely relieved that they believed I was small. At one point, while the dessert menus were being passed around, Cynthia leaned toward me again. You know, Daniel is very generous. We told him he doesn't need to feel responsible for you financially. Our daughter deserves a partner who's free to build a life without unexpected burdens. Unexpected burdens. Something inside me flinched so sharply I almost dropped my fork. I looked at my son. Really looked at him. His jaw was tight, his eyes fixed on the water glass as if conversation could shatter it. Mom, he whispered, not looking up, can we just go with it tonight? Go with it. Pretend this wasn't happening. Pretend I wasn't being dismantled piece by piece. Pretend I could be small enough to fit into the space they'd assigned me. The check arrived then, an elegant leather folder placed directly between Robert and Daniel. A symbolic gesture, perhaps. Robert lifted it with a grand flourish. Oh, allow me, he said. But when the waiter returned moments later, Robert's smile faltered. He whispered something. The waiter shook his head. Robert tried another card, stiffer smile, tighter voice, and again, the waiter murmured something apologetic. I watched without speaking. A quiet, almost imperceptible tremor passed through the table. But that moment, the unraveling of their perfect image, was only the beginning. The real shift hadn't happened yet. It was coming, and none of them saw it. Not even Daniel. I was still trying to steady myself after the Monroe's relentless little jabs when Cynthia delivered the final blow, so casually, so sweetly, that for a moment I didn't even realize I'd been struck. Linda, she said, folding her napkin with delicate precision, we'd like to offer you a small allowance each month. $600, just to help you get by. She paused, eyes glowing with condescending warmth. In exchange, of course, for giving Daniel and Rachel space. Less involvement, fewer expectations. For a second, the entire restaurant seemed to tilt. My ears rang. My vision narrowed to the soft, polite smile on her perfectly made-up face. An allowance. They were offering to pay me to disappear. Daniel darted a panicked glance at me. Mom doesn't need that, he said quickly, but even his voice wavered, as if he'd known this conversation was coming and prayed I wouldn't be offended enough to cause a scene. Cynthia lifted one manicured hand to silence him. Sweetheart, let's be honest. She could use the help. And it would make things easier for everyone. Everyone, I thought. Meaning them. My mouth opened, but no sound came out. Not anger, not shock, just an overwhelming, hollow disbelief. After all the years I spent holding our lives together, stretching every dollar, sacrificing every comfort, I was now being treated like some fragile, needy burden who had stumbled into their perfect world by accident. And Daniel, he just sat there. His face pale, his eyes glued to the tablecloth, offering no real protest. No pride, no defense of the woman who had raised him from scratch. But before I could gather my breath to respond, something shifted at the edge of our table, a soft voice clearing his throat. Excuse me, I'm so sorry to interrupt. A man in a tailored dark suit stood beside me, his posture respectful, almost hesitant. His face was familiar, though it took me a moment to place him. He held a glass of wine in one hand, a leather portfolio in the other. Are you Linda Harper? He asked. Yes, I murmured. His expression brightened with recognition. I knew it. You spoke at the Stratotech Leadership Summit last year, didn't you? I was an attendee. Your keynote on operational resilience changed the entire trajectory of my team. Truly, it's an honor to meet you. The table went still, absolutely, utterly still. Even the clatter of the restaurant felt muted, as if the entire room had collectively paused to listen. Daniel's head snapped up. Rachel's eyes widened. Cynthia blinked twice, quickly, as though trying to make the image before her match the reality she'd confidently constructed. I sat straighter, the shock of the moment slowly melting into something warmer, something I hadn't felt all evening. Something dangerously close to dignity. The man smiled at me again. I apologize for interrupting your meal. I just wanted to say thank you. Your work made a difference. He nodded politely to the others, then walked away before anyone could respond. Silence stretched across the table like a pulled thread. Cynthia recovered first, though her voice was thinner now. Stratitech, she said lightly. Is that some kind of local nonprofit? I let the quiet linger, savoring the crack forming in her perfect composure. Before I could answer, the waiter returned to present the check. Robert reached for it with renewed confidence, as if pretending nothing had happened might still make it so. He handed over another card with a tight smile. Moments later, the waiter returned, apologetic. I'm sorry, sir. This one was declined as well. Robert's face reddened. That's impossible. The waiter lowered his voice. I can try again, but the system flagged both cards. I sat perfectly still, not out of pettiness, but clarity. A clarity I hadn't felt in years. Watching Robert fumble, watching Cynthia's panic rise, watching Daniel's discomfort bloom into something like fear, it all came together in a way that felt almost surreal. Then something inside me, quiet, deep, long protected, finally stretched awake. I reached slowly into my handbag and withdrew my black metal card, the one I rarely used but always carried. The one that opened doors the Monroes didn't even know existed. I placed it on the tray with a soft, deliberate tap. Use this, I said gently. The waiter nodded with respect bordering on reverence. Of course, Ms. Harper. Cynthia stared at the card, then at me, her eyes darting in confusion, suspicion, maybe even fear. What kind of card is that? I didn't answer. Not yet. Because now, finally, they wanted to know who I was. And for the first time all evening, I felt no need to shrink. No need to soften. No need to apologize for taking up space. The turning point had arrived. And none of them were prepared for what came next. The waiter had barely stepped away with my card when I felt the shift ripple across the table, the kind of collective stillness that happens when people suddenly realize the ground beneath them isn't as solid as they believed. Cynthia opened her mouth, then closed it again, as if searching for a version of reality that felt less threatening. Robert straightened in his chair, adjusting his cufflinks in a show of composure that fooled no one. And Daniel, my son, looked at me as if he were seeing a stranger. For a long moment, I let the silence sit there. Not as a weapon, not even as revenge, but as a boundary, one I should have set years ago. I folded my napkin with slow, deliberate movements, then placed it beside my untouched plate. When I finally lifted my eyes, I looked directly at Cynthia. Her confidence faltered at the contact. I will not accept your allowance, I said quietly, but my voice carried enough steel to slice through the air. And I will not shrink myself so you feel taller. A flush crept up her neck. We were only trying to help. No, I interrupted, calm but firm. You were trying to reduce me. To fit me into a story you already decided was true. I let a lot slide tonight, hoping this could be a fresh start. But I won't pretend to be the woman you want me to be just so your world feels prettier. Rachel stared at her lap, tears gathering in her eyes. Daniel inhaled sharply, as if bracing himself. I looked at my son then, the boy I raised, the man I hoped he'd become. Daniel, I said softly, did you tell them I was struggling? That I needed help? He flinched. I didn't say it like that. But you didn't correct them either. He had no answer, so I turned back to his future in-laws and finally let the truth breathe. For 20 years, I have been the vice president of global operations at Stratitech. I manage a multi-$100 million division. I negotiate contracts in countries you couldn't find on a map. My work I chose not to flaunt, supports teams of thousands. Cynthia blinked rapidly. You're what? I earn $38,000 a month, I continued evenly. I live simply because I wanted Daniel to grow up grounded, not entitled. I never advertised my success. Not because I was ashamed, because he didn't need that kind of pressure as a child. I let the words sink in. Cynthia's lips parted in disbelief. Robert's hands stilled on the table. Rachel slowly lifted her eyes, hope flickering through her embarrassment. Daniel, he just stared at me, stunned, as if trying to reconcile the mother he'd always known with the woman sitting before him. But I wasn't finished. I've spent years choosing humility, I said. Choosing privacy. Choosing to let my work speak quietly. Tonight, you mistook that for weakness. And that's not my burden to carry. The waiter returned just then, placing the check in front of me with a small, respectful bow. Thank you, Ms. Harper. It's always an honor. The words hit the table like a gavel. Final. Undeniable. Cynthia swallowed hard. I didn't realize. No, I said. You didn't care to. Her face crumpled, just a little. Robert looked like he wanted to disappear beneath the tablecloth. Daniel finally found his voice. Mom, why didn't you tell me? I turned to him, my heart aching in a way I hadn't expected. Because you're my son. I never wanted you to feel overshadowed. I wanted you to succeed because of who you are, not because of my title or my income. His shoulders dropped. His eyes glistened. I never meant to hurt you. I know, I whispered. But silence can wound as deeply as words. I rose from the table then, not dramatically, not angrily, just with the calm certainty of someone reclaiming her place in her own story. As of tonight, I said, I'm done hiding. And I'm done dimming my light so others can feel comfortable. I reached for my bag, touched the back of Rachel's shoulder gently, and gave Daniel one last, steady look. You have a choice to make now, I told him. You can be their son, or you can be your own man. Then I turned and walked toward the elevator, feeling lighter with every step. Behind me, I sensed the pieces of their perfect narrative falling apart. But ahead of me, quiet, steady, liberating, was the truth. And for the first time all evening, it felt like mine again. The Boston night was cool when I stepped out of the restaurant, a soft wind pushing curls of hair across my cheek. The harbor lights glittered like scattered gold, and for the first time that evening, I felt like I could breathe again, deeply, fully, without shrinking myself to make room for people who had no intention of ever seeing me clearly. I walked slowly toward the edge of the terrace, letting the chill steady me. My phone buzzed twice in my purse, but I didn't reach for it. I needed silence. I needed space to understand what had just happened. Then the terrace door swung open behind me. Mom. Daniel's voice. Small, raw. I didn't turn right away. I wasn't ready to protect him from the truth of his own behavior. But he walked toward me anyway, each step hesitant, like a child approaching a lesson he knew he'd earned. I didn't know, he said, stopping beside me. I swear, Mom, I had no idea how much I hurt you. I studied his face, the boy I raised, the man he was still struggling to become. You didn't defend me, I said quietly. Not once. His shoulders sagged. I was embarrassed. Not of you, of them. Of how they talked. I didn't know how to stop it. And I didn't know who you really were. I guess I never asked. There it was. Simple, honest, painful. I touched his cheek gently, the way I used to when he was small. You saw what I allowed you to see, I said. I never wanted my success to feel like a shadow over your life. But I also didn't raise you to sit quietly while someone tears down your family. His eyes filled. I'm sorry. I want to do better. You will, I said. But now you have to choose what kind of man you want to be. Not for me, for yourself. Behind us, the restaurant lights glowed warm and inviting, but I didn't feel the pull to go back. Some doors close quietly, and you know it's for the best. Days passed before I heard from Rachel. When she finally came by my apartment, she stood in the doorway twisting a tissue in her hand, her voice trembling. I'm so sorry, Linda, she said before I even offered her a seat. My parents, they're obsessed with appearances. They taught me to hide anything that doesn't look perfect. But you deserved better than that. I nodded, not unkindly. So did Daniel. She wiped her eyes. I want to start fresh. If you'll let me. Her sincerity surprised me. There was no entitlement in her voice this time, no discomfort coded in politeness. Just a young woman who'd finally realized the cost of silence. We can try, I said. But honesty is the only currency that matters between us. Her relief was palpable. After she left, I sat by the window in my apartment, watching the late afternoon light stretch across the floor. Something inside me felt different, untangled, lighter. I had spent years keeping my accomplishments tucked away, as if humility required disappearance. But hiding had not protected me. It had only invited people to underestimate me. So I made changes. I started accepting invitations at work, conferences I used to turn down, panels I used to avoid because I feared taking up too much space. I decorated my apartment with pieces I loved instead of waiting for the right moment to treat myself. I even booked a weekend trip to Portland, a city I'd always wanted to see but never prioritized. I no longer apologized for having a full life outside motherhood. And slowly, the heaviness I'd carried for years loosened its grip. Daniel visited often, sometimes alone, sometimes with Rachel. He asked questions now, real ones, about my job, about my travels, about the years he had never bothered to imagine. And I answered honestly, not to impress him but to let him finally know me. One evening, sitting on my little couch, he said, "I'm proud of you, Mom." The words were quiet but solid, like stones placed gently in my hands. I treasured them, not because they validated me, but because they marked his growth. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. Cynthia sent a long email filled with explanations disguised as apologies. I read it once, then archived it without replying. Some relationships are better left exactly where they reveal themselves. But my home felt different now. Not bigger, not newer, just earned. Peaceful. A place I belonged without question. For the first time in years, I felt like the main character of my own life again. Not the background, not the burden, not the afterthought. Just me, whole, steady, seen. Looking back now, I realize the night that tried to break me was the night that finally set me free. I stopped apologizing for who I was. I stopped shrinking to make others comfortable. And I learned something simple but sharp as glass. People will treat you the way you teach them to, until you decide to teach them differently. Strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it rises quietly, in a woman who finally remembers her own worth. And now I'm curious, has someone ever underestimated you, only for you to show them exactly who you are? Tell me your story below. Let's remind each other that dignity doesn't fade with age. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Subscribe for more family dramas. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from.